to discuss an important topic, and one that's extremely relevant to what I do in Shell, which is to decarbonize the transport sector using all available options. Now, today's event focuses very specifically on the heavy-duty sector. I mean, it's clearly a sector that's vital to Europe's economic activity. And this sector is forecast to increase significantly over the next few decades to supply goods to a growing population's needs. Now, today, this sector produces around 1/4 of CO2 emissions from the road transport in the EU. And so developing a cleaner and more efficient freight transport system is really central to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, which we as a company fully support. So how can we support this important economic sector, which seems to have more limited decarbonization options than, say, for passenger cars, whilst making sure we do it and deliver fewer CO2 emissions? So one way we have in Shell of looking at these types of challenge is to use scenarios. And one of our latest scenarios, that's called Sky, looked at the scale of change the world might need to make in the coming years. And it looked at what meeting the Paris goals might mean, illustrating technically possible but challenging pathways for society to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. So in Sky, the electrification of the transportation sector as a whole takes pace at an extraordinary rate. In fact, half of global car sales by 2030, and by 2050, every new passenger car would be electric in this scenario, with some economies, such as Europe and China and the US, reaching this rate of change far earlier than that. But this scenario also shows that in other parts of the transport sector, electrification would not play such a prominent role. And one such sector is heavy-duty transportation. And this sector, amongst others, we can think of shipping and aviation, would still rely on high energy density fuels for about half of its energy use by 2050. So it's clear we need additional solutions. We need all available options to achieve the transition. And for freight, this is going to mean a range of energy-dense carriers, we believe. So, for example, liquefied natural gas or sustainable biofuels, including biogas or renewable methane, and hydrogen too. And all these represent promising solutions to decarbonize the heavy-duty transport sector, where greater energy densities typically are required than are provided by lithium-ion batteries on offer today. And this energy density brings longer ranges and the potential to handle greater payloads that are required by commercial transport. It's technically and economically challenging for battery-powered trucks to do this alone. So the industry is active. There are promising examples of new technology development. So Iveco, for example, is offering CNG and LNG vehicles, and Toyota are testing new hydrogen trucks in California. And at Shell, we're active in developing solutions also for heavy duty. We are investing in LNG infrastructure, we are developing hydrogen refueling stations for trucks, and we continue to develop new ways to produce biofuels using waste materials. So we're looking at biogas, for example, for use in natural gas vehicles in Oregon and other parts of the West Coast, and also increasingly in Europe. And maybe for completeness, I should state I'm also on the board of a battery electric vehicle charging company. So I'm well aware also of the potential for hybridization and electrification in this sector. I simply don't believe it is a full and complete solution. So what does this take to develop these technologies? I think it essentially depends on industry, so players like Shell, and regulators like many of you here this evening. So firstly, I think industry needs to collaborate with governments And so vehicle manufacturers and energy companies need to work together to develop the required infrastructure for these new fuels and make them viable for consumers. And I think one way to achieve this is through public-private partnerships, to build out the initial infrastructure to create the market, to activate the market. So, for example, in Europe, the Connecting Europe facility is a great example of this for growing networks in LNG and hydrogen. And together with other partners in industry, we've applied to develop a European network for LNG and bio-LNG, covering key transportation routes from Spain to Poland. So we, with our partners, will deliver the LNG infrastructure networks, and Iveco and Scania will deliver the trucks to demonstrate the commercial use also of bio-LNG produced from waste and residues for very low or indeed negative CO2 emissions. And I think also this sector may offer the greatest promise for reducing emissions through hydrogen technology. So fuel cell electric vehicles, in common with battery electric vehicles, have zero tailpipe emissions, but they have the advantage of higher energy density. And so, we are developing now 3 hydrogen truck refueling stations in California, in the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, with Toyota and other American partners, to create the world's first fuel cell truck fleet in one of the world's largest freight ports. So the importance of collaboration, of working together, is one of the reasons why Shell and other companies launched the Hydrogen Council in 2017 to promote innovation globally and accelerate the use of hydrogen technologies at pace. So what can regulators do? So clearly this also plays a vital role, particularly in the early stages of technology adoption. And when regulatory frameworks provide clear and coordinated and consistent signals that allow a range of technologies and fuels to compete openly and fairly in the market, the best technologies can develop to deliver real, scalable emission reductions. And in Brussels here, we often refer to this as the technology-neutral approach. Now, to date, vehicle efficiency standards, tailpipe standards, have demonstrated the greatest impact on CO2 reduction. And so we welcome the first ever efficiency standards for trucks, setting ambitious CO2 limits for the heavy-duty sector. And we also welcome the Commission's recognition of the important contribution that LNG, that is an available, scalable technology today, that LNG can play in the short and the near and medium term to reduce CO2 emission reductions. So LNG also provides air quality benefits and can reduce greenhouse gas emissions on a well-to-wheel basis by up to 20% compared to diesel. The policy framework needs also to recognize the CO2 emission reductions delivered by renewable fuels, whether they be hydrogen or bioenergy. And so we also propose some adjustments to the CO2 efficiency standards for trucks to account for the full CO2 emissions delivered from advanced biofuels and biogas. So in conclusion, I think what we really need to remember is that change at the required scale, the scale necessary to meet the Paris goals, can only happen if we get 2 things absolutely right. And I think, firstly, as I've described, we need regulatory frameworks to encourage all technologies to deliver emissions reductions and to develop and compete with each other in the marketplace. And with clear, coordinated signals from regulators, business can begin to invest in the solutions. And then secondly, beyond regulation, we need collaboration. Collaboration among businesses to help scale these technologies. And with scale comes lower costs and competitiveness for the consumer and our economies, so that we create really excellent solutions for our customers to buy. So on that note, I'll leave it to the panel to continue the debate. Thank you.
You've already touched on many points that I hope we can discuss a bit more in detail now with our panelists. So with no further ado, Mr. Holleley, I'd like to call you first on stage. Everyone will probably know this in the audience. Henrik Holleley, the Director General for Mobility and Transport with the European Commission. Sit here. Next on stage, please, Pierre Lahutte, Brand President, Iveco. James Nix, Director for Freight and Climate at Transport and Environment. And Christopher Fjellner, a European People's Party MEP from Sweden. Thanks very much. Great. Well, then let's get started, exactly. You see, we're polite up here. Thanks very much for joining me. Just to continue already from the introductory notes, I think you've already touched on some of the challenges that the EU is facing. So turning to you, Mr. Holleley, what is needed for heavy-duty vehicles and the freight transport sector to become cleaner, connected, and competitive?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kalina, and very grateful to Matthew also for laying the ground so eloquently and very much, I would say, also echoing and reflecting the philosophy that I am personally also extremely attached to. And I particularly noted one of the conclusions that you said, where you said that it is about mix of all technologies to deliver the emission reductions who should then compete in the marketplace on an equal footing. And I think that this is actually a key thing. And I think that it is very important that we would not discard anything. It is very important that we consider all those technologies when it comes to the alternative fuels, when it comes to alternative powertrains, that can make a difference, because a lot of efforts are needed. And on one hand, what you need, obviously, continuously the regulatory efforts. And I think that some of the proposals that we have also put on the table in the context of the mobility package are exactly the ones which are actually going to that direction and trying to do the trick. But regulatory aspects and incentives are one thing. The other thing is also the technology development, innovation. And third thing is also the rolling out. And there, again, you said the collaboration. I can't agree more. It is very much about the collaboration, about the different players. And through this collaboration, you can also make a big difference. One of the key things is also that we need to ourselves deliver, and which we already started in 2013 by tabling the directive for the alternative fuels infrastructure. I think this is absolutely essential. And this is when I also talk about the incentivization, when I talk about the regulatory intervention, because we need that. There will not be an uptake of the cleaner, if not to say zero-emission vehicles as well, if the infrastructure is not going to be present. I mean, you can say it's the classical chicken and the egg thing, but there also the investments which can be financed through the EU funds are the ones which would help to make a difference. And I think we need far more of the charging stations. We need far more also to consider all the other options, be it the LNG filling stations, be it the hydrogen, and many people know that I'm also very, I would say, kind of attached to and also very positive on the hydrogen. Even I'm well aware that.
Wait, if I just interrupt you there quickly, because you're already laying out all the things that the Commission wants to incentivize.
Let me then just say one thing. Your title is Cleaner, Connected and Competitive. How can this be the future for Europe's freight transport networks? I would say that cleaner, connected and competitive, this will be the future of European freight transport networks. It cannot be in any other way. And if I still can say just one thing, we have been focusing, and Matthew also, of course, representing Shell, is very much talking about the alternative fuels and also how to power. But it has to be seen in a holistic manner, because alternative fuels is also just one element. We also have to see the other aspects and the other solutions which would actually help to decarbonize transport and the freight transport and the heavy-duty vehicles. And that is also related to the digitalization.
Yep.
I mean, we need the smart solutions. We can much better optimize also the transport flows by using the big data, by using the artificial intelligence, by also creating more, I would say, fluid transport corridors. And also from the Commission side, we need to rethink the aspect that we have the trans-European networks. We have the trans-European network corridors. I think it's a great success because it is clearly sort of laying down the ways how we want to connect Europe from east to west and south and north. But the point there is that we should move to genuine, multimodal, clean and smart trans-European networks.
No, that's, thanks very much for touching essentially on all of the issues that we will have to, because now I want you all to comment on whether the Commission's vision is true to how you in the industry or from the NGO side or from the Parliament see it. And so I would like to first turn to you, Mr. Leeuw, because we've already heard there's much more to clean, connected and competitive than fuels. But however, in Brussels, the focus seems very much on the fuels at the moment in a debate of are trucks and cars going to be fully electric in 10, 15, 20, 30 years? Is that even possible? So I would like to hear from your position, from your view, what is possible and what is not, and how are you going about it?
Okay, first I'd like just to underline that you all think of Brussels people like cold bureaucrats, and Mr. O'Leary is exactly the example of the contrary. He's passionate, and I'm as passionate about this industry as he is. We sometimes argue, but I think the first thing I'd like to remind passionately, I think the first thing before I go into will it be all electric, and you can expect my answer is no. I'd like to remember everybody what is a truck, because we often make a huge confusion between what are cars and what are trucks. Truck first today is an extremely high efficient fuel vehicle. You need to realize that the average weight of a truck in operation, loaded, is 30 tons. And we reach now 30 liters per 100 kilometers, which is an equivalent of 1 liter per 100 kilometers at 1 ton, which is the weight of a car. And I defy anybody here to find a car which is at this level of diesel consumption today. So that's a very important point. Second point, the total market of the industry, the total industry in Europe is 350,000 vehicles per year. It's probably a very small single-line production in a big car group which do millions of cars. So it's a very specific small market with 7 manufacturers, with around 20 plants across Europe and very different configuration vehicle. So I like to underline that because often we think, oh, let's do on the car like we do on the trucks. Then
so is that a criticism already, a criticism you should have levied to Mr. Holloway or the Commission?
I think Commission got it. It took us some time, but we got it. And it joins to the point you were mentioning. Will all the trucks be electric in 15 years? I can tell you, no, they won't, because they are not made to carry batteries. And when you sit in an electric car, the payload is maybe 200 kilograms, 300 kilograms, a couple of persons, a couple of children, and fuel luggage. And basically, you've got cars which weigh up to 600-800 kilograms of battery. I mean, on trucks, we cannot do that. Whatever we put on the truck is taking away payload. So why don't we believe in the electric? We actually believe in the electric into the low-speed, stop-and-go urban mission. In fact, in our stand at ER, where Hanover show was last week, we had electric vehicles for the people transport also because it's high value. But whenever you start to grow in the speed, in the load, and in the autonomy you want to reach, you need to move to higher density fuel, like I think our colleague from Shell was mentioning. So there, we see more the solution of CNG and ultimately LNG, which is more dense and allows up to 1,600 kilometers autonomy. So electric into that, I think electric will have a role to play in the urban side. It will have a role into the electrification of certain system on the powertrain, but it will never be able to replace an energy-dense fuel like diesel, as we can do with LNG.
Mr. Nix, do you agree? Especially as transport and environment, you're huge fans of electrification.
We're fans of zero emission, let's be very clear on that. I don't think we should be fortune tellers about the specific technologies that are going to be used. And for us, the main priority is increasing the ambition of the proposal, on the truck CO2 proposal. And yes, we do see a certain minimum number of trucks from 2025 should be zero or low emission. But we stand back from the question about what exactly that technology should be. That's not for us a question. The question is, let's have very high ambition, let's have a minimum number of zero and low emission, and then let the market decide. Let the truck makers make the low and zero emission trucks.
So why is there then such a big difference between the positions of, for example, the industry and what's doable in terms of cutting carbon dioxide emissions for 2030, environmentalists or NGOs, as well as perhaps certain MEPs? Mr. Fjellner, perhaps if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I'd like to say that I think the Commission fundamentally has it right, and especially at the end point, will it happen? Yes, it will happen. My problem is it's not happening. No, and I have, now I'm a little bit colored being responsible in the EPP for the HDV file and being in negotiations on that right now. And it feels too often that there's too many colleagues and too many people just betting on that it will happen and will happen exactly the way they think it will happen. While it seems to be a little bit too much, a risky approach, going, for example, saying that we should have mandates for electric and we should go extremely quickly to electric, because will it... what worries me the most right now is that we let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this process. Because for me, I fully understand it would be wrong if you wouldn't say I'd like to higher the ambition, no matter what they would say almost. But with that said, for me as a politician, my main task is to get the balance right.
Yeah.
And the balance, right, is for me not necessarily between, we had a meeting now on cars in the EPP today, a big fight in the group meeting on cars. And then they say, oh, we have to trade between environment and jobs. No, no, no. Of course not environment and jobs. What we have to do is to see to that we get the balance exactly where we drive innovation, where we see to that people go out and buy these new cars or trucks and can afford them, and that we move forward instead of just, you know, aiming for something fantastic to happen in a couple of years.
Yeah, and yet the balance seems to be slightly different from person to person.
Well, what's in the Commission proposal right now is what's called super credits. So that's double counting, triple counting, or quadruple counting vehicles on the road. So, you know, in the Commission's proposal, in the case of the Commission proposal, instead of having one zero low emission truck on the road, you know, the Commission assumes you actually have two, and some people want that counted more. And the issue is that for cars that's been discredited and discontinued, it didn't keep pace with Asia. Europe with cars, we didn't keep pace with Asia, nowhere near it. And then our point is, let's not reuse that failed system with trucks. We can do better. And that's where a benchmark, or some people call it a mandate, come in. And just to pick up on Pierre's numbers, you know, it's 330, 350,000 depending how you measure the market. It's not a lot of vehicles. I think for Iveco it's about 35, 36,000. It goes up a little bit or down a bit year by year. But, you know, 5% of that will be 1,200 vehicles. So it's by 2025. So if you start next year or the year after, that's a relatively modest step up year by year. And that's the kind of vision we have. And we think, look, unless you have that minimum threshold in there, there isn't something for the companies to aim to. And the super credit system just ends up with the double counting creates what's known as hot air. Because in that...
So you're afraid of essentially too soft approach, too late, especially given Asia.
Yeah, it didn't work before, and let's not try it again.
But from my perspective, I would probably agree to part of that if I could go out there today and see a zero-emission truck, and maybe even buy a zero-emission truck and say, you know, then I would say, how might that affect the equation 2025? But if it's not even around, we're dreaming of it still, so to say.
I can sell you one.
You can sell me one. The big question, then you will sell me one that might be from hydrogen.
Then I make the price.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, exactly. So you could sell one, but?
No, actually, the super credit system, why it's there? It's also there to help us manufacturers to develop new technology, which in the initial stage will be few, but will become more later, because it's extremely costly to invent. Even if I was believing in an electric truck, or actually we are now working on a test fleet of hydrogen, it's extremely costly in an industry which is not that big. So we need to have somehow a support system for this kind of attempts. That's the way steels industry was born, even in the car. Then I think it's today the zero CO2 truck exists. I mean, we were at ER last week. On our stand, we had no diesel engine. zero diesel engine. We had electric vehicles, CNG and LNG. And we had one truck which was coming, which we sold in 400 exemplary to Carrefour in France, which is a refrigerated truck, fully operating on methane. But it's going to actually be fueled by the biomethane, which is produced on the biomethanization on the farm where the carrot and leeks for Carrefour are produced. So they will basically harvest the carrots, clean them, package them. The waste is used in the biomethanizer on farm, and it will fill the truck. And it's actually happening today. It's not, they ordered 400 trucks. And this truck will be, in theory, tank to wheel, which is one of the big limits we see, 95% negative. In reality, if you consider the carbon sequestration through the compost going back to the field, we reach minus 135%. And if we had used co-manure, we would be at 180% negative, meaning it's not only about cutting the tank-to-wheel emission, but creating a circular economy which is far more resilient than replacing oil with lithium, I think, which is local and basically help generate the energy and fix carbon in the soil so organic matter returns there. I mean, those are solutions which are available today, now, we sell them, some people buy them, and they are not captured really by yet the legislator, even if there is a discussion now on enlarging the discussion from tank to wheel to well or field to wheel, because I think that's the reality. And we all know climate is changing faster than maybe it's even admitted. We need this kind of solution now. It's not that we can dream about hydrogen for 2030, because that will not be ready before. It was a promise, we believe, 10 years ago when Jeremy Rifkin wrote the hydrogen economy 10 years ago. The Commission had all betted on that. I remember I was in the ag business. We did a hydrogen tractor. We got the gold medal in CIMA Paris, and we were thinking by 10 years it will be there. It's nowhere, because hydrogen today is 95% cracking from methane. We don't yet have a simple, affordable technology for green hydrogen. It doesn't exist. So I cannot either be told to develop a hydrogen truck and then have to conclude at the moment of launch, yeah, but the hydrogen is coming from cracking methane. Yeah. What's the advantage? What's the purpose? And then being told, no, your truck, we don't want it anymore.
We were at the truck fair in Hanover as well. And when you look at the production numbers, you know, if you start off with 200 a year in 2019, 2020, and you double every year, you do get to those kind of numbers I'm talking about. You do end up with 5% production. So what we actually took away from Hanover was the massive enthusiasm of an awful lot of the engineers working on these zero-emission and low-emission trucks that they can actually deliver. And I think it's up to policymakers now to harness that really collaborative spirit that's taking place right across the industry and to strengthen those standards.
But I think in Hanover, what was very interesting, I mean, that's what we tried to do differently from some of our competitors. I'm sorry, I'm advertising a bit for Iveco. But a lot of people put concepts. And the customer which came there were all anxious. Because today they invest in vehicles that somehow we tell them that it will be outlawed sooner or later because of the diesel scandal. And they're paralyzed. And what we try to do is we don't want to sell you the future possible, exciting, with shape like it could land on Mars. We're going to sell you trucks which are available today and which can have a carbon balance even negative. And to give you an idea, when we started on putting these LNG trucks on the market 2 years ago, the industry, it was 0.1% of gas truck in Europe. In 2 years' time, we're already past 1%. So it can grow faster. But then, of course, we need the support of the European Union on the infrastructure, or Shell.
Yeah, and on that, but you wanted to say something.
Yes, I see that my level of passion is not as big as yours, Per. And
we let them judge
and,
at the end.
But I've always...
Well, the winner gets a car, a truck.
The truck, yes, thank you. I know I was just listening to what you said about the co-production, the vegetables and the biomethane, and then, you know, with the one pipe to fill the truck and then filling the with the vegetables, the booth, so to say. So that would be great.
It is real.
No, I know, but I think that this is a kind of a future that many of us would like to see. But for the time being, and I think for quite a while, we are going this as a great exception of what can be done, but not something which is going to be effective and sustainable, at least in the near future. I also have to actually defend a bit on the hydrogen side, because I just had the pleasure in the weekend to drink water which came out from a hydrogen car, and it almost tasted situated like Spa. So it wasn't too bad at all. And you could also see that, you know, the car is driving and the water comes and you can bottle it and then put it in the trunk and start to selling it as well. So there are many new ways of doing business. But
so we'll see what you're doing once you leave the Commission.
Exactly, exactly. You already have a business idea. But when I listen to my colleagues on the table, around the table here, and who come from all different parts, I really see that there is a general understanding that the multiplication of the solutions is needed, and all solutions which actually are supporting the goal of getting cleaner vehicles on the streets and also cutting the emissions and making improvements to the air quality, that they are all welcome and should be welcome. And as you said, I mean, we are no fortune tellers here, but we see that there is technological solutions, and let's go and give them the chance to exist. And then by time, of course, we will see which one will be more efficient than the others. And on that also, I would say, European solutions. We also need European solutions. The title is Cleaner, Connected and Competitive. I think we have been talking a lot about the cleaner. I think that when we talk about the competitive, it's also about the issue of that Europe and European solutions become more and more competitive on a global scale. And again, I mean, if you take the batteries, for example, we are not a great producer of batteries. When we talk about lithium, we are not also the one who is mining it in Europe. We are much more dependent on the others. When it comes to hydrogen, for example, our technological solution, the hydrolysis, is still the #1 in the world. And yes, you're right, it's not there yet in its entirety, but there are a lot of good proposals, there are a lot of good solutions, and also 5-10 years it can develop much further. By the way, I made an interesting comparison over the weekend when we were talking about this and talking about politics. And I said the classical, traditional political parties, they're like the internal combustion engine. For the 100 years, they have been there, and they have been developing, but they have come to the end of their developing cycle. So you can't really anymore add value. So now you need the new solutions.
Sorry, what you want to tell me?
Now you need the new solutions. You need the new solutions, like, you know, be it hydrogen, be it biomethane, be it gas, which are actually starting from a much later base and bring a totally new kind of disruption. And you see that also what's happening in politics. I mean, it is just, I thought it was just quite an interesting comparison to be made. And
I'm sure that all the car makers here that are still betting on the internal combustion
last point,
engine.
if I may, just Karina, sorry, I got carried away. But the balance, get the balance right. How many times have we heard that? And again, when I listen to you, I kind of get the feeling that the Commission might have got the balance right on that one, because neither of you is thrilled and none of you is unhappy. So, you know, it's about the nuances, but we will get there.
I might not agree with you on politics, on the development of politics. I realize I should have been in Hanover because that seems to be where everything happened, and I know
still go there tomorrow.
It's my daughter's birthday, so I think that's a challenge. But I now know also why I don't like Spa. Actually, to drink Spa, I think it tastes strange, that water. But I think what the most important thing here for me is probably what we try to emphasize, but what I don't see coming out of the process right now, and that is that everything we have to use all available technologies, and we have to see that everything is done at the same time. Because it's very hard to do with a tailpipe approach, just to start with.
Exactly.
For example, and now we have a tailpipe approach. I tried to do amendments. We were, pulling our hairs can we turn this around? But, we didn't manage. We said, let's do it in the review. But how can we actually get there? Because biofuels, for example, and then I have a lot of colleagues saying, no, biofuels is no good, but we just agreed on the Renewable Energy Directive, and if we agreed that is good there, then we can't say we don't like it now. And if this problem is as severe as we say, and we're running out of time as we say, we can't afford to do anything but that makes a difference here and now. Instead, I have a notion, not at least in Parliament, that everybody wants to go electric as much, as soon as possible. And the risk that I see with that, and that's probably partly because of the mistake having this in parallel with cars, that people think it's the same market.
Exactly.
Not only the different products, the markets are different. When I want to buy my next car, fuel consumption, honestly, to be perfectly honest, is probably not the first thing I will look at. And my neighbors having Teslas, I have 2 of them, they didn't buy that due to fuel consumption. They bought it for completely different reasons. But when I meet anybody buying a truck, they say, it's all about fuel consumption. It's all about fuel consumption. And
it is a market competition driver, which we took time to convince the European Union because, of course, the reference was initially the cars, but in our industry, any liter or kilogram of gas saved on one of it, it's just bottom line. And by the way, everybody here wants an Amazon delivery for free. Nobody wants to pay for transport. So and you look at the sin margin of the transport operator in Europe, it's constantly, I mean, there is no industry where we fight more for saving fuel, that's why we are defending a more conservative approach, because we know we are really, if we don't do it, we are dead, but we've exploited all what we could so far in technology. We need to invent new things, but it may be very different from the car situation here.
Yeah, I mean, what we're pushing for with the Commission's proposal is minus 15% in terms of efficiency, but its own impact assessment, the evidence there actually shows that minus 20% is both feasible, socially better, economically better, and better for job creation. So surprise, surprise, we're supporting minus 20%. I have a lot of sympathy for Christopher's point on fuels. I mean, the issue is verification, that so many of these trucks at this level are generally, they can be multi-fuel. It's not possible to tell when that truck goes out on the road, was diesel put in, was a biofuel put in, was an advanced biofuel put in, and with that then, I think the Commission, if you like, has fallen back on an emissions reduction approach at the tailpipe, and I think we can understand that.
But there is still one point here, because I want nobody to be confused. Whatever happened in the car industry, we are in a total different situation in the truck. The Euro 6 regulation, we've got a mandatory onboard diagnostic system which will shut down the power of the engine if we get out of the standards on the NOx and PM, for example. So, I mean, we've always had been a far more stringent regulation on trucks.
And yet there was a truck cartel. It's not that...
That was something else.
No, of
and
course,
it was before Euro 6.
From an outsider, of course, the truck industry seems to have its...
But just to pick up on where's the state of the art in terms of heavy duty vehicles? So buses are in there with trucks. And if we look last year, there was 100,000 zero emission buses produced. But more than 99,000 of those were produced and sold in Asia, and less than about 700, 750 purchased in Europe, and most of those made outside of Europe. And I mean, there's the kind of Barcelona vision, if you like. So what Barcelona is doing is those zero-emission buses, they're being charged during the night, and then they're bringing in the recycling of the garbage lorries, and they're recharged during the day. And you know, in terms of what the manufacturers are doing, and there isn't just Iveco, I mean, there is Iveco, but there's 6 or 7 other large ones as well. And what they're doing is they're focusing on that smaller urban delivery market first, the urban utility, urban delivery, generally 18 to 28 tons. And then it does remain to be seen how that will migrate up along through the through the vehicle classes or through the weight classes. And I think that's where, we're all saying we're not fortune tellers. And for the very long distance, I mean, Siemens have a solution with much like a tram where they electrify overhead and then they take power from cables and so on. And so there are many...
Should we be concerned in Europe? Should
I
truck
think
makers
first,
be concerned about competition?
I mean, when we speak of Asia here, I think you mean China. I think you can say the word. Unless we're afraid to mention China. But I wouldn't exchange our European Union community political structure for what is China. I'm not in favor of a state-administered economy. And I think what they do in China is questionable. I mean, we've seen with the BYD buses delivered to London, where suddenly somebody raised the hand to understand that the lithium was coming from a super polluting mine out of Tibet with forced political labor. Okay, so we can admire the Chinese model. It's not my admiration as a European citizen. That's the first point. I'd like to make it clear. Second, I mean, the electric overhead lines makes me a bit smile because we had actually a customer recently in France which switched back from the train to the road when he realized that actually 20% of the freight rail in Europe is not electrified. And the locomotives used are actually outdated in terms of technology and emissions, and basically putting back on LNG trucks his freight, he was reducing his carbon footprint because our customer, they don't only calculate the fuel, they calculate their CO2 economy. Today, IKEA, Carrefour, Nestlé, Nike, all the big corporates which are chasing their CO2 carbon, they come to our customers and say, you need to get it down through fuel economy, through intelligent measure, or through LNG or biomethane like Carrefour does. So we need to be careful because this dream of electrified motorway, I mean, it's costing €1 million a kilometer. And we couldn't even achieve the electrification of the railroad system in Europe. So how can we dream that we're going to do that on motorways?
But I mean, we don't need to just only go to China for examples. I mean, we have the example of vans, which are also a commercial vehicle, and what we had there was, the European market wasn't delivering a zero emissions van. DHL, Deutsche Post wanted one. They wanted the last mile delivery to be clean and quiet. And then they partnered with Ford, and now they're going from production 200 a year to 20,000 a year in a few years' time. So a rapid leap up, and the European manufacturers are a little bit chasing that market now because they don't have the scale production or the plans for scale production of zero emission van. And again, we talk a lot with retailers, Carrefour, Nestle, Unilever, those kind of companies, as well as retailers. And what they're saying is they want to get to clean, quiet deliveries straight away. And then that puts the question back on European industry. Will it be European industry that delivers these cleaner trucks?
On that point, if I may just hold you quickly, are there any questions in the audience? Since we're running out of time, and if you have any pressing questions, do ask them now. I'm so sorry, I'm very short-sighted. So, and the lady in blonde.
Christine Bittner from SGS. There was a great point picked up about freight and railway. Actually, DG Move is responsible for the white paper on transport published in 2011, which has a target to electrify, to promote freight through railway. And how could you comment this target? We are definitely far away from it.
Great, thank you very much. Then the lady just behind her.
Barbara Koorman from Hanover Communications. I have a question to Iveco. Would you think, because you say we don't have the technology, fuel efficiency is already a big market driver, would you say if you have an engine standard in addition to a vehicle standard that really drives the engine technology that might be available but not yet productionized, would that help, you think, as a driver for vehicle manufacturers?
I think...
Let us just take the last question, which I think my colleague Simon wanted to ask, and then if you directly respond to that, and then perhaps if the panel could respond to the other on the rail question.
Hi, Saim Said from Politico. My question was about who is responsible for providing the technology that everyone on this panel seems to want, in terms of supporting that technology, in terms of providing either the investment or the market or the consumption, because everyone here is saying we need solutions, but I don't know who you're looking to provide those solutions, whether it's somebody else on the panel or whether it's somebody who's not here.
Thanks.
Well, can I kick off? I mean, first, on China, I very much agree with you. And on the rail, well, the one which is not electrified, by the way, last Monday, we had the first hydrogen train. And I think that there is also a lot of potential for that. But your question about the rail freight, yes, it was 2011 white paper, and unfortunately, we are still not there where we wanted to go when it comes to that target. I mean, we have been constantly and consistently talking about moving more freight from road to rail for many reasons, which you know better than I. I mean, with the congestion, with the decarbonization, with the overall air quality, just name it, with the road safety, we could save people's lives. And what has been a problem? I mean, Libor was here, I saw, he probably wouldn't say that it is the rail sector, but it is part of it, it's also the rail sector. And I hope that we have been able now, with the fourth railway package also, to make a difference there, to try to open up the borders. You can't put the freight on the rails if cross-border, seamless trains do not deliver in time because of all kinds of, I would say, old and outdated regulatory environment. We are now getting rid of that. We are now opening up, and I also see that the Livor's clients there, the rail companies, are also much more open to do these kind of things. I was just last week in Innotrans, you know, the biggest rail fair. I've never seen ever before in the rail sector so much optimism and so much willingness to deliver. And I think this is a positive thing. Yes, the target is not yet met. Yes, there is much more to do, but I see that there is a spirit there which actually can make a difference. We tear down the borders which have been there. Let's get rid of those regulatory framework which doesn't help us, and let's move ahead on that. And I think that then when we meet in a couple of years' time, we can probably have a more positive story to tell. Now, who is going to provide the technology? Well, I don't think it will be the Commission and the European Parliament, that's for sure. Of course, if you look who are here, I mean, Pierre obviously has something in the back pocket, but I'm also sure that the extremely sophisticated companies which come from the country that you know best, then are also definitely helping to contribute that. Again, it is a combination, I think Matthew said earlier, collaboration, which also means that we have to have the regulatory framework which incentivizes. We have to have support also to the innovation and to the new technological solutions. And obviously, in the end, it is the market, it is the industry who comes with these solutions. Who else can provide that?
So I tried to understand and answer the first question. I think the biggest challenge we've got in the trucks is that it's today extremely constrained in its, let's say, what I would call its envelope. The regulation, mass and dimension, has been there for ages, and it needs to evolve, because I think as an industry we've gained to the limit of what you can do when you need to do a truck in 16 meters and you need to maximize the freight capacity, and you end up with trucks which are as straight as an old cupboard. And of course, when you push that on the motorway, you've got not the same resistance if the truck were elongated and more aerodynamic, like the car industry can do, for example. So we did an evolution on this regulation, for sure, to be able to reinvent the envelope and the way we define and produce trucks. I think European manufacturers have been the leader in the world on fuel economy technology because we had to cope with this very limiting architecture or geometry. Now there are changes which are being developed. It's a mass and dimension regulation. The big challenge is that with other regulation we have coming up on us, not only the CO2 regulation, we've got the mass and dimension, which will allow to make trucks differently. We've got the general safety regulation, which will put some other constraint. And on top, we've got a possible Euro 7, which is, of course, having an impact on the way we'll design trucks. So our business is today at the mercy of a lot of regulation, which can simply collapse it if they are not properly coordinated together, and recognize that when we put trucks, the development time are not that of a car. A car can be developed in 18 months. A truck, there are cycle of investment which go on 10, 15 years. I mean, the cab on our Iveco has a design which goes back to 25 years. I mean, it's not like, I've told you the volume, 350,000 for total industry divided by 7 manufacturers. I mean, it's not like it's the same as the millions of cars you've got to face. And I think to answer the last question, I mean, I'm on stage, I need to bring back technology, that's what I live from, and I try to market. Of course, the infrastructure side, together with the regulation, are fundamental, because we need stability. I'm going to give you a little story which is going to make you smile. But it's on the bus industry.
And then, unfortunately, will have to be the last story because we're also running out of time.
So I will just, I'm coming from the agricultural business, and I joined Iveco Bus in 2012. We were investing the biggest money we ever put on renewing our bus range, which was going to Euro 6, which was supposed to be launched on the market on 1st of January 2014. 100 million euro, really a big job. In November 2013, the Greater Council of Greater Paris, Île-de-France, put itself together and voted unanimously that it was for them illegal to buy diesel buses because they were known to cause health issues and basically death of people. You can imagine that as an investor, as a manufacturer, suddenly the world collapsed. An investment was the biggest in history, supposed to be paid back on 5 to 6 years, suddenly it had a life expectancy of 1 to 2 years from the moment it was launched. And for us, that's a big danger. We are not a state-owned and administered economy like China, which give the order to this city to order 3,000 buses electric from this company. It doesn't happen like this. It's a liberal economy. And if we don't pay attention, we're going to destroy this industry. Because what we put as a burden on its shoulder now, we may not like it, but it can really collapse it. And I don't think it's better in China. I'm sorry. Huh? I prefer to defend European Union industry and democratic system.
On that happy-ish note?
First of all, when it comes to rail and trucks, I think the Commission laid out a lot of it. Just one thing that I'd like to add that I often think we forget, because often I think we portray it as a conflict, them in between, while they're so clearly independent. Yeah. You know, it's not as if we're going to have either rail or trucks. To have a well-functioning railway system, we actually need a well-functioning HGV system, and vice versa. And that is something I think we need to keep in mind when we approach this. The most important question, and that's almost a philosophical question, is who's going to do everything we want to do? And you're right, it's not me, it's not the Commission, it's not even Transport and Environment that will do it, it's Pierre that will do it. But right now, we tend to end up, not at least in the European Parliament, saying that, but you know, we can always make a mandate and force him to do it. Yeah. But the problem is, of course, that if we could have a command economy saying that, I'll just force you to invent something, we kind of tried that. It didn't really work. And that's why I sometimes have problems with when one says that, yeah, but it's possible with existing technology to do X, Y, Z. And then I'm like, okay, what is this technology? We have a lubricant here that I tried to calculate backwards could deliver something 4.5% fuel efficient. And it's like, give me that lubricant, you know, I will sell it. I will earn. I will quit politics and just sell this bloody lubricant. But if politicians keep at that, and when we in the European Parliament take a fine-calibrated proposal and say, for example, 2025, that, yeah, but we can just force them to do more 2025. But in a sense, will actually 2025 targets drive innovation? My impression, when I actually meet the people that's supposed to do this, they say, oh, but we've more or less produced, we've almost decided, we can say what we're going to sell 2025. Huh? Yeah. Maybe the next target is, of course, that can drive innovation, and there we're going to get the balance right. But it's the most important thing in politics is not often what you do, what you shouldn't do to mess things up.
And then I think on a term of time,
the
urgency of making
California's mandates are extremely successful. So I mean,
but cars and trucks.
But we need it for trucks. We absolutely need it for trucks. And if we, the key question, what drives the innovation? I mean, it is ultimately the financial penalty level that's set. Because that then, top management can then allocate the resources into decarbonization that we all acknowledge are needed, and then that investment flows through the firms. When we spoke with the engineers at Hanover, they were extremely enthusiastic they could deliver zero emissions. There was no hesitation. The only hesitation came for them was the question, would the finance be released to their zero and low emission sections so that they could deliver the level of output we need? And that, to me, is the key question. And that's where the regulation has to drive innovation.
Hire that guy, because he will be able to build you things that...
And Chris is going to pay.
Well, I'm curious of the success of California. I hope you read the latest article on what's going on with the electric bus from China, because it backfires now.
I would love to continue this debate. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I would love to literally continue. Do please continue outside. I'm sure that everyone will continue to passionately discuss. Exactly, we'll hang around. First of all, thank you very much for this. I hope we will continue this debate in the future. It seems like it definitely needs to be. It seems that there's certain bridges of understanding still need to be bridged.
And if I may, Kalina, I just give you an idea, because we can continue next time. I was a bit sad that we didn't have enough time to talk about the second C, namely what the connected system can actually bring in order to clean the system. And
you should tell that to Shell so that they know.
Absolutely. I know where their focus is, but I know that they also have a holistic view, so that's very important. So I think next time we can also talk about that, and also what kind of limitations we put ourselves, and how much there is lip service on one hand, and then actually doing totally different on the other hand when it comes to allowing to, platooning to cross-border or EMS systems or what have you, which would have positively affected also the sector as such, but something has to be for the next time.
Well, thank you very much on that front. I say thanks very much, and wish you a good evening.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.